Okay, you guys, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've got a really good, wonderful international meeting tonight. We've got South Africa, our normal chapter 3 to 2, and then we've got a lot of guys from 441 over in Seattle, other side of the world. I think it's a 9-hour time zone difference there. And Saratoga, which is just south of Tampa in Florida. Thanks for joining us again, Gary. Great to have you guys. Don't have the whole gallery in front of me, so if I've missed out a few people, forgive me, but we'll pick it up on the once we've done the meeting. It's being recorded, so we'll have a copy of it if anyone wants to look at it later. As you can see, I'm sitting in front of the Brown Arch at the moment, and wishing I was there. Normally, my Google Calendar told me that I should be there today. So normally I'd be there in the summer, but here we sit with this crazy virus. Okay, so I'm going to share screen here. Just tell me if this is working. And I need to go on to slideshow. Normally I've got my son-in-law to help me here, but he's gone hunting this weekend, so he's not here. Okay, guys, so welcome to our 3 to 2 gathering. Thank you for joining us. Just a reminder, our MUC system is up and running, and that's the QR code. If you scan that with your phone, you'll get points for attending the meeting. If you don't know how to scan, please learn, because this is the last meeting that we're going to be doing it manually. From now on, it will be an automated system. Okay. There's our normal meeting place for you guys in Seattle. We normally have it at the Dickie Fritz Moth Hall. I don't know if they have the moths in the USA. It's a member of the Tin Hats. It was a Second World War organization, and we normally rent their hall, but because of the COVID crisis, they won't be opening it until we're at least level 1, which is a long way to go. Okay. That Carl normally got his little hooter there, so there's Carl's hooter, which means we're ready to go. Okay, tonight we've got a mystery aircraft, and if any of you guys know what this aeroplane is, please can you send your answer in on chat to our host, Mari, and we'll buy a hamburger for 2 for the lucky winners. I think our hamburgers are going to be safe, though. I've taken out the registration and the name of it, just to make it a little bit more difficult. But if anyone can identify the plane, you're in for a prize. Okay. So just welcome to all our new members. We've got quite a few new members joined this month. Thank you for doing that, and welcome to our meeting. Our visitors and special guests, especially you guys from the other side of the pond. Thank you for joining us. And then all our current members again, welcome. A couple of July birthdays we've got. Nico Walters, Tony van den Heuvel, he built that beautiful G5 or G4 that Chalky flew to London and back and broke the...
G4, Osprey.
G4, yeah. Magnificent builder, aircraft builder. That went to London virtually non-stop. Sid Langton as well this month. I don't know, Sid has got that beautiful runway down overlooking the Orreby Gorge. We used it for a rally once, and I don't think I've ever landed in a smoother runway. He was building a KR2 at the time, and he reckoned he needed something pretty smooth. So it was a lovely grass runway. Richard Nicholson, Richard, you there, I think. I think Richard just doesn't want a present. He just wants his airfield back. If anyone can organize that for a birthday gift for Richard. Michael Lemon, the 11th. Francisco Naselli on the 12th. Richard Pornefeld on the 13th. John Herbert the 14th. Robert Ritchie on the 19th. Johan van der Stey. Welcome. Happy birthday, Johan. Bartok on the 24th. Andrew Pittman, he says don't bring him a present, just place an order for a Sling TSI. Would be happy with that. Stephen Turan, happy birthday for the end of the month, Stephen. And Brendan Lennox. Okay, previous minutes, have we got a proposer that we emailed?
Mari.
Mari, thank you, Mari. Seconder?
All right, Carl.
Oh, thank you, Carl. Financials, and we're just going to have a quick look at where we stand money-wise in the chapter. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, well, welcome to everybody. You can see not a lot of activity through the financials because all the cancelled events, but in total, we've got 200 members that are paid so far. And last year, for the 12 months, we had 256. Total income has been the membership fees, 49,800, interest, 19,000, and donations, money that we collected. So we collected 69,450. Expenses, very limited so far, 994 Rand for bank charges. We paid for the MACH program and prepaid the hall as well. We rented the hall for 12 months. We have requested that they will, all the months that we miss, they'll add it on at the end of the period once it opens again. They have offered to repay the money as well. Total, our expenses 14,662, which means that in total our income has increased to 54,709. Right-hand side, where's that all gone? It's all gone into the bank account. Our savings account is now sitting at 628,000. Little money in the bank, 3,800. Members that paid in June were 7 members, 4,600. That is the finances 6 months to 29th of June.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Mark. No other questions there? All good? Can we move on? Thank you. Okay, just on our MACH program, congratulations. We've had a few guys go supersonic. Supersonic is, we consider 120 Mach 1.2 or above. And this month, members who went supersonic was Paul Lestrucci, Dave Toma, Eugene Kazane, and Ronel Myberg. Thank you very much for all your input, and it's good to see you climbing up the ladder there. Okay, just on the MACH program, just want to point out something. It provides an opportunity for members to be rewarded for participating, contributing, and volunteering for EAA Chapter activities. Prizes include a trip to Oshkosh. Everyone, I just want to emphasize, everyone in the program has a chance of winning in the final draw, even if you have minimal points. We're going to have an electronic draw at the end of the year, so the more points you have, in other words, the higher your MACH number, the better chance you've got of winning. But everyone does have a chance right up to the end of winning the prize to Oshkosh and the other prizes that we have in the Okay, future events. Saturday, 11th of July, tentatively still the FAWB Bella Bella Tail Draggers fly-in, organized by Richard Nicholson. Once we know more what's happening with our situation, we'll be able to confirm that. Tuesday, 16th of July, Flying Legends Talk Show, Carl Jensen, hosted by Scully Levine, 2 legends. And if anyone listened to watched the last one with you prior, you must agree that it's a really worthwhile show to watch. Thank you. Well done, Mike, and well done, Maury, for putting on such a good thing, and to you as well. And then Friday, 4th to Sunday, 6th of September, we've still got the EAA Sun and Fun fly-in at Groblersdal and the EAA convention. Hopefully we'll be freed up and we can have more than 50 and fly in, have a successful flight. Maybe a good get-together after all of this. Okay, Sean Cronin, aviation facts that you may not know.
Okay, thanks,
Neil, I'm just going to try and share my screen. This is sort of Neil and my doing, and we're going to call it just plain facts. We're going to start with the big aeroplanes this time, but it's just a bit of fun, bit of humor, most of it information that you guys all know. And if it's not useless information, you can use it somewhere. That Carl's used up all this information years ago. So we'll start with chicken or beef. Every airline has this precaution in place, and for obvious reasons, that the pilot and co-pilot eat separate and different meals, just in case one meal is bad. So, Captain, you probably always add the chicken. I know you. Interesting fact about losing body mass and body weight, that the body loses 8 ounces of water for every 1 hour of flight. And it's a wonderful way to lose weight, but it leads to a bit of dehydration, but just an interesting fact. In terms of the big man that sits up in the front left, what do I call him again? Well, the captain. He's not just the captain of the flight. He's the final authority of everything that happens in the air. Everything that he does or she does is the rule. He has the ability to detain you, to arrest you, and he also has the ability to take your last will and testament. God forbid that ever happens. Let's talk about tire pressures on airliners. So you pump your car to, they're working in pounds per square inch. In South Africa, we would normally work on bar, but I'll give you the PSI ratings. Your car will be pumped to about 30 to 34 PSI. If you multiply that about 6 times, you'll get what the aircraft tire is pumped up to. The tire is supporting about 38 tons, landing at 150 odd miles an hour, and they've inflated them to 200 PSI. Just an interesting fact. Next fact, why does airplane food taste so bad? Well, it's not the chef that is to blame. Actually, the fault lies with the plane. And the environment inside an aircraft actually alters the way food tastes and how drink tastes. Sweet items taste less sweet and salty flavors are heightened. The dry, recycled air inside the plane cabin doesn't help either, and the low humidity can further dull the taste, and smell making in everything in a plane seems bland. Another interesting fact on landing lights. A lot of airliners are fitted with pulsing landing lights. These are turned on to pulse mode when the aircraft is descending, coming into to land. And then a few hundred feet before touchdown, it is put onto full bright. The reasons for doing this: it increases the aircraft's visibility, reduces ground collisions. Well, he's not on the ground, I know that that's going to happen. But this is an interesting one. Reduces the possibility of bird strikes. And it also increases the life of the incandescent bulbs, allowing the filaments to run at lower temperatures. Useless fact, but interesting. This one I found very nice. American pilot by the name of Lawrence Sperry in June 1918 invented the autopilot. He also invented the Smile High Club. This was 100 years ago. His father, Elmar, had developed the gyro compass, which they used in American warships. Lawrence took his dad's idea, modified it to meet the needs of maintaining 3 flight axes, pitch, roll, and yaw. Hence, the autopilot. In his short life, Sperry also invented the artificial horizon. A guy by the name of Jimmy Doolittle used an artificial horizon in 1929, and he did what they called a blind flight. In 1929, same year, the instrument landing system was introduced. This was approved and adopted by the International Civil Aviation in 1949. They were, I guess, 20 years to actually understand how this whole lot worked. So Air Force One has almost an unlimited range. It can carry the president to wherever he knows, wherever he needs to go. It has its own onboard medical suite, its own gymnasium, and it has air-to-air refueling capabilities. Cost of this airline is a mere 3.2 billion rand, dollars. The next one we're going to do is the oldest airline in the world, which is none other than KLM, and started in the year 1919. On these same beautiful 747s that Carl used to fly, there's between 140 and 170 miles of wiring inside a Boeing. Little interesting fact about control towers: all airport windows are angled at precisely 15 degrees from the vertical. This is to decrease reflections from both inside and outside the tower. Another interesting fact: flying fuel. Aircrafts get airborne and need to make an emergency landing. From time to time, they dump fuel from its wings. Well, it's not very common. It's a safety procedure to keep the plane from experiencing an overweight landing. Now, we would think you'd be covered in kerosene all over the roads and cities, but in fact, the fuel evaporates before it reaches the ground. And those are my interesting but possibly useless facts for the week, for the month. Thanks. Back to you, Neil.
That was good stuff. Thanks, Sean. Really lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. That was great. A couple of things that
Thanks,
I never knew about there. Thank you. And I see Arnie Quest has joined us as well. He's president of 932 in Chicago. Welcome, Arnie. Thank you for joining us. And we've joined a couple of his meetings. Really good with Bushcat Tom. Okay, so now let's get back to sharing my screen. Let me just work out how to do that. Okay, aviation facts we've done. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then a quick update from Rob Yonkers. As you all know, we've had big problems. We've not been allowed to fly with the lockdown. So Rob has been on it, negotiating with our CIA. And Rob, if you can just give us a quick update there on that.
Yeah, all I can say is things change by the hour these days, not even by the day. So yeah, we are challenged with trying to figure out how we're going to get ourselves flying again. And what the minister said on Monday, is still not promulgated in the Gazette that we can see. So the CIA is also hampered with what they need to write up. Unfortunately, what they did was, you'll know that the NOTAM that was previously published expired last night. So somebody not in the full know essentially put together a hasty NOTAM that was sent out, I think, just after midnight or before midnight. And that's what most of you have seen today. And the CIA is having to, retract that. So there will be an update to that NOTAM, probably most likely tomorrow or tomorrow night sometime. And you will see there will be it's more a simplified, call it wording, which will reference a new general notice that will also be published. Now that new general notice is going to include the more details around each of the, call it general aviation and recreational aviation disciplines, and what will be allowed to be done. Now this is all based on a submission that was already made to the Department of Transport already, mid-June, in fact earlier than mid-June. And all the MailChimps that you have seen that I've released or talk about that, where we are trying to get a phase 2, call it situation, defined for us being able to fly. Most importantly, I think proficiency is one of them. And we also want proficiency in our sport. So that is what I wrote in there, and that's what we are asking for. But what is in the Gazette, nobody knows yet. So unfortunately, the CIA have pulled the trigger, but they've had to retract that, and you'll see an update tomorrow on that. And now they have to wait to see what the Gazette is going to say, and we hope that the Gazette will be released in the next day or so. It should have been released at the same time as the minister's speech, but it never transpired that way. I think there's been a lot more focus on the airports that need to be reopened in phase 2. It includes Bloemfontein and Kimberley and so on. So I think there, the mind of the Department of Transport and the CIA have been more focused on airlines than general aviation. But I think we are going to at least be able to fly more. There will also be, call it the registration system that will need to be used. Similar to what we have done with the maintenance flights, although they will have the system more instant. As soon as you apply, you'll get an instant, call it approval. So there's no waiting, for this. So I'll, as soon as I have, call it more concrete information, it's a bit fluid right now. I will again communicate, with all of you via the MailChimp method, and you'll see what will happen. I'm hoping to do that by, late tomorrow. That's all I have for, for now. We're trying our best to, I think, get us unblocked to at least fly a bit more. And the other thing that needs to be said is, the COVID cases are rising here in Gauteng and in other places. There may just be consideration to increase the lockdown levels back to high levels again, but we hope that will not happen. I think the other thing that the government is concerned about, and of course that being discussed with the Department of Transport and with the CIA, is that it's not so much about the flying, it's about the control of the virus in related to flying operations. So that is what they are trying to ensure is under control. And that's what we need to sort of make sure of when we, do get allowances to fly, that the COVID controls are in place, to be safe. That's really, I think, the biggest point. Okay, I don't know if there's any further questions.
I would like to make a comment, if I may.
Sure, Carl.
Okay, Rob, I cannot but thank you for the energies that you've expended and the way you have exhausted yourself in trying to get this across. Our appreciation is absolutely phenomenal. I'm sure I speak on behalf of many people. I do feel that what we have been shown here by the concessions that have been made have been discriminatory, and it's something that we really need to investigate further. And it's got to the stage now where there is absolutely no, as hopefully others will agree with me, there is no reason for these people to stop us doing what we do. If they come down with, when I say these people, I mean DOT, CAA, that if we fly as individuals, let's not cross the provincial boundaries, but let us at least fly. How can we possibly be a hazard to this whole COVID business? Rob, I would just really like to emphasize how we appreciate what you have done. But I do believe that we are being shortchanged, hand over fist, that you can, certain types of aviation activities are allowed, which are probably more or with more worse with the less social distancing that is required. That, for example, how can you authorize people to do skydiving? Is there perhaps a vested interest that causes the skydiving to be accepted when everything else is, not everything else, when so much else is being denied to us?
Yeah, I think, Carl, I think once we have I would say the wording and so on sorted out in the documents, you will see that that most of call it our type of flying will become unrestricted. That's what we are trying to push for, and I think we will be able to obtain it. I think the reference to the parachuting that was made more in the line of the air services type of parachuting, and not necessarily call it recreational parachuting. But even then, we are looking at at a protocol where they can where they will be allowed to operate. But that's still a work in progress.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I appreciate your explanation, but I'm afraid I don't buy.
Yeah, so so it'll take probably another day of work between us and the CAA to make sure that we try and get everything that we want. Especially with their solo operations. I mean, we're even trying to say that especially in the proficiency sense, I've been promoting the fact that not everybody may feel proficient enough to go and fly on his own, his or her own, and that we should have allowances for not passengers, but rather to have a safety pilot to join. So I'm trying to make provision for that kind of category as well. So at least we are covering bases. We want people to be safe. And that's what we are trying to do.
Okay, appreciate what your efforts there, Rob. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Really appreciate what you've done for us, and hopefully we'll be back in the sky soon. Okay, which brings us on to the next subject. A lot of us are rusty. Mistakes can happen. I know Ant Harris went flying. Went out to his plane the other day, and he thought his battery was flat, but he had forgotten to turn on the avionics master. So just stupid little things can happen, and which I think brings us to our next presenter, which is Brian Lee from Seattle. I attended one of his talks in Oshkosh at the chapter there once, and a really interesting talk. Haven't forgotten it. And Brian's going to be talking to us on checklists. Over to you, Brian. I think, Mark, you guys are going to share a screen there.
Sorry, while they're busy uploading the share screen, Neil, Jean-Pierre had his hand up. Jean-Pierre, was there anything specific that you wanted to address?
I had a question for Rob. Sorry, Rob, I'm always the one asking you here. You mentioned that the application for flights are going to be slightly modified in such a way that the permission will be given immediately. Then I have a question related to that. Is that correct, first of all? Did I understand you right?
Yes, that is what we are working with. I've already got a prototype system working, and just before this call, I had an hour session with the CAA to demonstrate how it will work. I have to modify it a little bit, but in general, they're happy with what they see to be able to register flights, and apply for and register for flights. And it will be the same as like what you did with the maintenance system. You'll get an email that says you're good to go.
Right. Sorry, can you hear me? So then, therefore, I've got a question on that. What is the purpose of making an application if it is anyway authorized immediately? So why not? Yes.
The reason for it is the CAA wants to know who is airborne at any given, in any given period. they also need to know where, because if there is, for instance, call it an escalation of a COVID outbreak in a particular area where they need to know who's been operating where and when, then there's a register of that. So that's basically the reason why. And there's also, when you fill it in, you have to, answer, a couple of COVID-related questions, and that you're compliant with COVID protocols when you do go flying.
Okay.
So that's the reason why that is going to be put in place. It's got nothing to do with, registering where you are flying and what have you. They just want to know, is there a register of flight taking place on a certain in a certain period, and where it is and when it is. That's all, and who it is.
Okay, thank you very much. And is that going to be still restricted to only once a month type of thing, or?
No, it will not be. We're not going to put any limitations, or they're not going to put any limitations, to amount of flights being involved. So it's very much, we are pushing for, I call it unrestricted flying.
All right. Thank you very much.
That every flight is at least registered, so that if they need to consult records of who's been where and when, that there is such a thing that they can look at. Okay. It's really an automated call it registration system, more or less.
Thank you very much, Rob. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, guys. Thanks for that, Rob. I think we'll keep updated on the WhatsApp group and those channels in future once we've got closer news. Okay, just on the mysterious aeroplane, Mark Owens got it right, but I don't. He was at an unfair advantage, and also Franz Smith. Do you want to tell us about that mystery aeroplane, Brian, and then you can continue with your talk.
Okay, very briefly, the mystery airplane is Swanson Tinkertot. It was custom designed and custom built. It began as a project for one of our members who just wanted to entertain himself to see if he could design and build an airplane, and it progressed into a father-son project. He designed it in such a way that you literally glue the drawing to a piece of metal, cut it out and bend it on the dotted line and assemble it. Well, the original designer, Hilmer Swanson, passed away about 1.5 years ago, and his 73-year-old son needed to find a new home for the airplane, so I've recently acquired it. And our intent is to make a flying club out of it. So it's a fun project. Really is a cute little airplane. I'll add one more to the just plain facts. We saw lots of pictures of Boeing 747s. Do you know why there's a hump on the front of the 747? That's so the captain can sit on his wallet.
You lying, you lying.
Okay, and now on to the presentation. In addition to 441 and the Chapter 26 up in Seattle, I'm a member of Chapter 252 in Oshkosh. And like Neil, I only get to go to about one meeting a year in Oshkosh. And when I do, sometimes they ask me to speak because I don't show up very often. So I had done this presentation in Oshkosh, and Neil was there to hear it. And he remembered it. And with COVID-19 now, we're all getting used to having virtual meetings, and Neil wondered, I wonder if we can put together this virtual meeting from two sides of the Atlantic. And so he contacted Tracy Nowak, who is, if you don't know Tracy, she's the goddess of fabric. But she's a member of 252, and she went back through the records and discovered that I had given that presentation in July of 2017. And she got in touch with me, and I got back to Neil and said, sure, I'd be happy to do a presentation for you. And so here we are. collaborating across about half the globe here, 9 hours worth anyway. And I hope you can enjoy what we've got to talk about here. This is in preparation. You can see the Falco there. There's a story to that too. That was built in Appleton, Wisconsin, just about 15 or 20 miles north of Oshkosh. The builder spent 32 years building the airplane, and he died before it got to fly. And the family asked me to do the testing, so I did. And I'll just make a note that there's going to be some reference here to some regulations, but they're US centric, and I think you guys probably understand that. So we're going to talk about why we use checklists, and where did checklists come from, and when are they used, and some various types of checklists. Then I want to talk about a process for building checklists, because in EAA, if we're home builders, we are the manufacturers, so we get to decide what goes in the checklist and what form it takes and all that. And we'll review a couple of examples and talk about some recent emphasis on checklists, at least emphasis in this country. So we use checklists because people get busy. And when they get busy, sometimes they get interrupted or distracted. And frankly, there are some tasks that are just plain critical. Now, this is true not only in aviation, and checklists are used in other segments of the population as well. Checklists are commonly used in medical practice. They're used by firefighters and other first responders. Checklists are used by maintenance personnel. In this country, when you do an annual inspection, you are required to use a checklist to do the annual inspection. And I'll point out even small things sometimes can benefit from having a checklist. I work in a borrowed shop. The widow lady who owns the building has allowed me to work in there. And I have a checklist hanging by the door to make sure I turn off the lights and I turn off the furnace and I lock the door when I leave, just so I don't leave the radio on and frighten her. So all kinds of good reasons for having checklists. So where did they come from? Well, between the wars in the US, the mainstay was the Martin B-10. That was the first all-metal monoplane bomber in regular use. It came to use in the US in 1934. That's what it looked like. And when it came in the late 30s to replace the B-10, the military requirements were for a useful bomb load to 10,000 feet for 10 hours at 200 miles per hour. And they desired, not required, but desired a 2,000 mile range and 250 miles per hour. So the three contenders were the Martin 146, which was a further development of the B-10, the Douglas DB-1, which became the B-18, and the Boeing Model 299, which became the B-17 eventually. The 299 was a really exceptional airplane, outstanding airplane. It flew nonstop to Dayton at 252 miles per hour to demonstrate what it could do in order for the Army to do their fly-off. But this was the result on the second day of the fly-off. B-18 won the contract for the new bomber for the US Army. The pilots had failed to remove the gust lock. Now, how many times have you gotten in an airplane and started the engine and then realized you didn't pull the chocks out in front of the wheels? I've done that, and it's embarrassing, but that's one of the reasons why we have checklists. So here's the 299 cockpit. It's kind of an amazing bit of knobs and switches and buttons and round dials. The conclusion after the accident in Dayton was that modern airplanes are too complicated to be operated from memory. So the Boeing test pilots began developing checklists. So that's the origin of checklists, was as a result of the B-17 or 299 accident in Dayton. Boeing test pilots started making checklists. And specifically, what is a checklist? Well, very simply, it's a memory aid. And I want to draw a distinction here between a procedure, training, and a checklist. A procedure is a complete, detailed documentation of a process. It's not appropriate for real-time use. And I think Carl can probably speak to this very well. Pilot training is a set of skills, knowledge, and experience required to do a task. And the checklist is simply a way to ensure that the critical items get accomplished. So now we have a procedure, and in modern airline parlance, the pilot is expected to do the procedure, and then the checklist is there to make sure he did at least the critical things in the procedure. But based on his training, he's expected to do the procedure first. So we use it for normal procedures, covering actions you intend to do or at least consider every time in a process. And we have checklists for non-normal procedures, covering contingency actions that may be necessary only occasionally or even very rarely. Now, one example there is in the US military, there are what we call boldface procedures. And those are for every emergency situation. There's a set of items which are absolutely necessary, and the pilots are required to memorize those. So you do those boldface procedures, and then you get out the checklist and make sure you've done everything else required. For example, an engine failure. There are some things you need to do, and you need to do pretty quickly, and then you can get out the checklist to figure out all the other things to properly secure the engine and configure for single engine out operation. So there are many types of checklists. There are read and do checklists. Many times this is similar to a procedure, but without the detailed explanation. The US military uses read and do checklists. In general aviation, we train typically with what could be called a read and do checklist. You get out the checklist and you do every procedure on the checklist. There is a challenge response type of checklist that's suitable for multiple crew operations, where the pilot not flying may come to a checklist item, for example, gear down. The captain will then check to see that the gear handle is down and the 3 green lights are on. So he's challenged and he responds by confirming that the action has been done. And then there is the flow and check type of checklists, in which pilots are expected to know the procedure from their training, and the checklist is there to ensure that critical items get done. So you do the flow, and then you get out the checklist. And this is common, like I said, in large airplanes, in airline operations. I'll relate one anecdote on a particular test flight many years ago at Boeing. It was the 3rd flight of the day. The crew was busy. They were tired. They got to the end of the runway, and the tower had a takeoff clearance ready for them. And they pulled out of the runway and went to full thrust, and the configuration warning horn came on, indicating that the flaps were not set properly. And as they're accelerating down the runway, both pilots are looking at the flap indicator, wondering if the flaps are going to get to the right position before they have to rotate. So they're looking at the airspeed, and they're looking at the flap indicator, looking at the airspeed, looking at the flap indicator. And finally, the more experienced of the 2 test pilots reached up and pulled the throttles back and aborted the takeoff. When they cleared the runway, he said, "There's only one item on the checklist, and we missed it. We're going to go do this again." And they taxied to the other end of the runway and took off. But there's a really poignant example of even a short checklist. If you miss it, it could be deadly. So how do you present the checklist? There are a lot of different ways. Paper, laminated cards, etc. That's what we typically use in general aviation. Nowadays, with modern electronic instrument panels, we have the ability to have electronic checklists. And in Boeing airplanes, for example, many of the modern airplanes have electronic checklists that are smart. On a 787, when you get to the set flaps part of the checklist, the airplane knows where the flaps are. And if you haven't set the flaps to the right place, it won't let you go past that step in the checklist. So we're making use of modern technology to help us with the checklists, but they're still there. Many Dynon systems, for example, you can make your own checklist and put it in, and you can do the checklist right there on the screen. Styles, I'll just make a comment that if you're going to make a printed checklist, choosing a font which is sans serifs, they are easier to read. The psychologists tell us that that frilly fonts with little tags at the ends of the letters that are called serifs make it more difficult to read, especially in high stress situations. The psychologists also tell us that you should avoid all capital letters. Lowercase or mixed case print is easier to read, again, especially in a critical situation. Use of color can be very useful, but it can be difficult at night, especially if you have red lights in the cockpit. So you ought to check that before you make liberal use of color. In the end, the best checklist you can have is the one you're going to use. And if it's inconvenient, you're probably not going to use it very often. So make sure that it's convenient enough for you to use. Is a checklist that nobody uses isn't very useful. Now the background photograph here is a Convair B-36. The pre-takeoff check for the flight crew had more than 600 steps and took more than an hour. And that was after the ground crew spent 6 hours getting the airplane ready for the flight crew to arrive. This is one of the areas where we can make use of technology and preset everything. I know a crewman in the US Air Force on a KC-10 tanker. And when they're standing alert, they're required to be able to be airborne in 15 minutes. So what they do is they go in the cockpit and they set every switch to where it has to be, right up to the engine start place in the checklist. Then they close the door and put a seal on the door. So if they get the call to launch, they can break the seal, push the start button, and be ready to go and be airborne in 15 minutes, even though it's a pretty complex airplane. So how do we build a checklist? First is you need to understand the operational concept, and this includes any use of automation. If you're a home builder and you want to build your own checklist, that's wonderful, but you need to sit down and give careful thought to the operation itself. How am I going to operate this airplane? And not just normal operations, but emergencies as well. You should identify the critical items. That's what the checklist is there for, if you choose the flow and check version. You can identify pause points in the checklist. Things that it makes sense to pause here. So if I'm going to be distracted, let's take a break at some particular point in the checklist. Then you reduce it and rephrase it. And this starts a kind of a checking loop. Consider what format, and then test and improve. Spend a lot of time sitting in the cockpit working through your checklist. Oh, you know, I should add this. And you might discover that a month later. I should add something. Or, boy, doing these things in that order just doesn't make any sense. Be open to the idea that you can adapt your checklist and find something that works for you, but it still has to cover all the critical items. So here's a couple of examples. Here's a really complicated Cessna 150. I developed this flow for the airplane, and it's a matter of position. So I've identified one is adjust the seat and put your seatbelt on. 2 is check the flight controls. 3 is check the rudder pedals, flight controls, free and correct, all that. 4 is the radios. 5 is the make sure the trim is set, and 6 is make sure the fuel is on. Now we're ready to start the engine. The point of this sort of pre-start checklist is to make sure I don't actually put a big voltage spike through those expensive radios, for example. So make sure all the switches are in the right place, because sometimes maintenance personnel get in and leave things on. Sometimes I might forget to turn a transponder off at the end of a flight. So you make sure everything is set, but I do it in a way where there's just a natural flow of my hand across the instrument panel. So here's a Piper Arrow, PA-28. The checklist itself is actually printed on the instrument panel. You see the two red ovals there. But that's not the procedure, that's the checklist. So I developed a pre-start procedure, much the same way as I did for the 150. And that procedure starts in the lower right-hand corner of the instrument panel, goes across the sub panel, and then up and across the instruments. So you do the circuit breakers and you check, make sure the engine monitor is off. And number 3 is the alternate air, and 4 is the electrical switches, and 5 is the mixture, and 6 is the prop control, and 7 is the throttle. 8 is make sure the gear switch is down. 9 is make sure the autopilot is off. 10 is the instruments. 11 is the avionics. So I start on one end of the panel, work my way across, go up and go back across. And once I've accomplished that, then I know that all the switches are in the right place, and I can confidently start the engine and proceed with the rest of the operation. So here's a before start checklist for a Cessna 310. There are 27 items on that checklist. And I like to make fun of Cessna's checklist because sometimes they don't make a lot of sense to me. It looks like they're just written down in random order. Maybe they're alphabetical, I don't know. But and let's go through this checklist. This is a factory checklist from Cessna and see if it makes sense. So there's the cockpit. Item 1 is to have the pre-flight done. Item 2 is make sure the control lock is off. 3 is to adjust the seats. 4 is the landing gear switch. 5 is the alternate air. 6 is the alternator and voltage regulator. 7. Let's just walk through these, Mark. And I don't have to read through them all. But see if this makes sense in terms of a flow that you think you can remember as you work through those 27 items. You're sort of all over the place. Keep going. Okay, so frankly, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And the first time you do something like this, it takes you an hour to figure out where things are. So what I did is I rearranged things a bit. Here's my improved pre-start checklist flow. So in this case, I start at the control lock. I move down to the seat belts and seat adjust. And then I start on the floor in the bottom, and I just move straight up the center, go around the throttle quadrant, one more loop around 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, then to the avionics, then across the switches at the top, down to the sub panel, and over to the circuit breakers. So my hand moves in sort of a natural flow pattern, and I got all of the same items checked. Okay, so what about do-it-yourself checklists? This is kind of an important detail. Some airplanes have checklists that have a part number, factory airplanes. If your checklist has a part number on it, it is required to be in the airplane. So if you're flying a factory airplane and this Cessna checklist has a part number on it, you have to have it. For home builders, you are the manufacturer. You can put a part number on it if you want to, I suppose. Doesn't mean you have to use the factory checklist, but it means you have to have the checklist in the airplane. You can fail an inspection for that detail in the US. So there's been recent attention to checklists. The FAA put out this safety alert for operators having to do with commercial off-the-shelf. That's what COTS stands for, checklists. So you can buy printed laminated cards from any number of pilot shops. Sporties is popular in the US. There's a big one in London, probably some in Johannesburg as well. And generically, there's nothing wrong with those because somebody has thought about it and revised the checklist flow, much like I have. But the FAA wanted everyone to realize that there is maybe a little bit of risk because those checklists aren't checked by anybody. and if you buy them commercially off the shelf. In this case, a pilot used one of those commercial off-the-shelf checklists for a landing gear emergency, and it turns out the checklist he had omitted some items and had omitted some warnings, and there was an accident as a result. So make sure any DIY checklist has all of the elements of the factory list, and for critical items, make sure they're in the right order. So the message here is that checklists have their origins in accidents. They are very important and they deserve our attention. Checklists must use the operational concept in cockpit design. Take advantage of that. Pay attention to it. There are checklist designs which are appropriate for nearly every case. And there are checklist designs which can contribute to cockpit confusion and invite mistakes. Checklists which are too long or too confusing won't get used, and that's the wrong kind of checklist to have in your airplane. You need a checklist that you will use every time. So that's all I have. I want to thank you for your attention. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us to collaborate. Neil, back to you.
Thanks, Brian. That was great.
Neil, I have a question. It's Athol.
Sure, go ahead.
I thought, go ahead.
It's very interesting, Brian, and what a wonderful talk. I'd like to ask you a simple question. If, as you said, capital letters are used throughout in a checklist, why are the NOTAMs produced all in capital letters?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that. I'll offer a speculative answer. And that is that, at least in this country, many government distributed publications like NOTAMs, weather reports, things like the textual weather, all show up in all caps. And that's a leftover from the technology of teletypes. Teletypes originally didn't have lowercase and uppercase letters. They only had one letter, and that was it. And why have we just adopted that format? I can't tell you that. I'm just reporting that the research I've done suggests the people who study the psychology of someone picking up and urgently reading a piece of text do better with mixed case letters than those who do with all caps.
Brian, it's Athol again. You're absolutely correct. And what I've done over the past few weeks with the NOTAMs that have been issued by our own regulator here is I've translated them into proper English and put them out in my various publications. So at least they're readable in upper lowercase.
Well, there is the translation to English too. For some reason, they have maintained the obtuse abbreviations that were used only to, and they were originally used only to fit it into the teletype format at a limited number of characters.
You got me there, Brian?
There,
okay.
Now I can hear you, yes.
Right. Brian, your enthusiasm is terrific, and your professional background really makes this a worthwhile thing to listen to. When you talk about checklists, the read and do, I think that is, well, maybe in a single pilot operation that could be applicable. In airline parlance, where you've got, and you were talking about the B36 and the 600 items, they had boxed items, and the boxed items for us were things that you had to be able to do from memory. So if you had an engine fire, the first thing you do is press the button to cancel the klaxon so that you could think clearly. Then, as Joe Sutter said, you sit back and you light a cigar and you think about it. And then you close the thrust lever, you shut off the fuel, you pull the fire switch, fire the bottle. Those were the boxed items that you had to do. And the same in an emergency, say, with a depressurization, boxed items. put on your oxygen masks, commence the descent, etc. Now, just going back a while, that those before, maybe after checklists, they were called vital actions. And the Greek word for vital or vita means life. So if you don't do your vital actions, your life is imperiled. And I do believe that those checklists are absolutely sacrosanct, that you cannot fly an airplane or a complex airplane without a checklist. From the basic military training where they had, it worked for almost everything, was the mnemonic BUMF, brakes, undercarriage, mixture, pitch, fuel, flaps. And if you don't do that on every takeoff and every approach, you are going to come short. And you can, I have found that you can actually apply those mnemonics to flying a 747 or that little fire trap that you see behind me, that airplane there. The 299, I'm really sorry that they hashed that, but maybe that was because they didn't have checklists. And just for gee whiz, I was offered a ride in the Boeing 247. I was in a crew collecting a 747 from Seattle, but there was nobody around to actually fly the airplane. Really sorry about that. That would have been something, I still regard that as something on my bucket list. My own personal experience on checklists where there was a complete snarl was out of Cape Town with a DC-3 or C-47 as you might call it. We taxied in and we had to refuel. So refueling, and the wind was howling from the side. So the traveling technician got out and he put in the gust lock in the aileron, in the one aileron, and we taxied out, and we had to use the intersection, but holding the wing down to the one side so that it wouldn't lift in the crosswind. And when we got on, turning onto the runway, the co-pilot said to me, "Let's do a control check." So I said, "No, it's okay. We didn't put control locks in, and we're just holding this airplane." And we did a control check, and it didn't work because somebody had put the aileron lock in. And if it wasn't for the co-pilot's intuition or just his insistence on doing vital actions, we wouldn't be here today to sit here telling lies and laughing and really listening to you and appreciating what you have to say. Brian, you and your guys who have joined us from the USA, thank you so much for this. And especially to you, Brian. What you showed us there was really a well-prepared presentation, and it makes good sense. And thank you so much for that, and thanks for being here. And Neil, thanks for letting me say this.
Carl, you're quite welcome, and it's my pleasure. It really is.
No, lovely. I hope we see you again soon.
And I'd just like to echo what Carl has said there, and thank you, Brian, and all you guys for joining us. It's been a really great presentation, well thought out, and I'm glad I could experience it again. Thank you for that. Thank you, Brian.
Again, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you. Just to round off, we just had a couple of notes on the chat. Richard Nicholson would like to say a couple of words about the tail draggers flying for the 11th of July. So if I can hand over to Richard.
Hi, Neil, everybody. Thanks to Aero Club Rob and company for the privileges that was bestowed on us with the assistance in getting freedom for sport. We at Warmbars Flying Club and Warmbars Airfield will be ready for the fly-in. We don't know what the regulations will be at the time, and obviously we don't want to break any rules and COVID laws and so on. But you know, as things if you can make it there, we will be available and we will be ready for you guys. So let's play it by the rules and see what what the lockdown, interprovincial movement and so on limits us to. But we will be available and ready for the fly-in, as far as we can do it. Even night stops, if you guys have permits to fly in on Friday and depart on Sunday, that'll be fine. We've got camping facilities and we've got guest houses available. And also, obviously the catering will be ready, but we have to know what the figures are. So if you can let us know in advance, but let's see what happens. I think, as Rob said, tomorrow with the new NOTAMs coming out and so on, and the government gazette, we'll just play it along with that. We will have ATC available if need be. Nigel said he'll be there for the safety officer, and everything else is in place. So just let us know what's happening.
Thanks, Richard. We'll keep you in touch in the WhatsApp group. Okay, just next meeting, Wednesday, 5th of August. Thank you for joining us for this one. Just remember, you're going to need to scan the QR code. So we're going to leave it on for a while. Here, it expires at 8 o'clock tonight. I don't know what is the time now. And so you've got time to scan it and earn your points. And thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Great to have you all, especially guys from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you.